Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Richardson from the Long Island Advocate, and today I am joined by Dr. David Green, a political science professor at Hofstra University, to discuss President Biden's actions to combat the coronavirus pandemic during his first 100 days in office. Dr. Green, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here as well. So starting off, can you walk me through what actions President Biden took to combat the COVID-19 pandemic during his first 100 days in office?
Well, I think he mobilized the totality of American government. And, first of all, he set a very ambitious goal, and then he revised that goal and made it even more ambitious in terms of the number of shots that he wanted to get into people's arms within a very brief time frame. And I think, he has been entirely respectful of the science of COVID and epidemiology and pandemics, and has mobilized the government accordingly. So they're doing everything that they can do and have been to acquire the vaccinations, and then to make sure that those are actually getting to people, and to support the states, and obviously to push through a massive legislative package through Congress by the skin of its teeth, but nevertheless, it got through. Like I said, in order to, I think, mobilize the totality of the federal government, as well as the states and localities, as well as the private sector, as well as various non-governmental organizations. And so you're seeing, I think, real leadership from the president on this issue. I think he's understood in a way that a lot of people have not understood, that these crises are interrelated, and you cannot hope to solve the economic crisis unless you first solve the health crisis. And so by solving the health crisis, you actually probably solve both. I mean, my expectation is that once the health crisis is largely solved, assuming that it is, the economy is probably going to roar back. We're going to see, probably levels of growth we haven't seen since the years right after World War II. Because of all kinds of pent-up demand. And so, but you can't do it unless you solve the health crisis. So I think Biden has been smart about that and attuned to that issue.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's not just the health crisis that President Biden's been dealing with during his first 100 days. Taken all together, how do President Biden's first 100 days compare to those of previous administrations?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think there are a lot of people, and I guess I would probably be one of them, who would say that, there's always this debate about, does the man make the presidency, or do the times make the presidency, and particularly what makes a great president great. And I think you'll notice, if you look carefully at the data, that there pretty much isn't any president who's considered great who doesn't govern during a moment of crisis. So, whether you want to call that lucky or unlucky is up to the individual. But Biden is, if you will, sort of lucky in that sense, that he comes to office, I think, at a time in which there are multiple crises. I just mentioned two of them, but there's also a civil rights crisis in America, and there's also a climate change crisis in America, and there's also a crisis of democracy in America. I mean, I think, without stretching too much, you can say that there are at least 5 simultaneous crises going on in the country right now. So that's unusual. I mean, even if you're talking about Lincoln, who faced, I think, what is arguably the country's greatest crisis in all of American history, it's more or less one crisis, albeit a very, very big one. And same with FDR. He really faces 2 major crises, but they're sequential. So he spends the 1930s doing the first one, and then the 1940s doing the second one. So Biden, I think, is unusual in that respect. So, if we compare him, I think, to other presidents in their first 100 days, let me make 2 comparisons. One, purely, and the way I think we've traditionally done this analysis of the 100 days, would be about the legislative accomplishments. And here I think Biden has one very big accomplishment, but more or less only that one. And I view that largely as a function of the times that we're in and the nature of the Republican Party, which is a party that today I think is much more devoted to winning at any cost, including the welfare of the country, than it is to anything else. And so if you're a president, you have to deal with that, and he does, because the Congress obviously is incredibly narrowly divided. And if you have to deal with that, then it's going to be very hard to ring up a lot of legislative victories, say on the order of Lyndon Johnson or FDR. But he does have that one, and he may have a couple others before too long. What I think you can say about him, though, kind of thinking about this in different terms, is maybe comparing him to more recent presidents rather than sort of all presidents. And that's a maybe more accurate comparison in the sense that, that reflects the times that we're in. We've been in very polarized times for a while now, although I would say more polarized literally today than yesterday, and more polarized yesterday than the day before that. In other words, it's just really accelerating. But that said, it was polarized during the Obama administration, and it was polarized during the Clinton administration and the Bush administration and so on. So I think if you compare Biden to them, and I'm not really comparing in terms of legislative record, but in terms of success at leading the country and problem solving within the context that he's given and with the tools that he has available to him, I think he probably compares quite favorably to recent presidents. And I think that's also kind of a surprise. I mean, I will confess to being surprised that I think Biden so far, with some exceptions, has shown himself to be a stronger, more confident, more progressive and bolder president than I would have ever guessed, given his 40 years or something in Washington that we've been able to watch him in action. So I would say that he's had a very good 100 days, albeit, again, you need to have a crisis or multiple crises, I think, to be able to quite say that. But he's got that, and I think he's reacted accordingly. And I think he's had a very good 100 days that you could say probably is better than any recent president and many others who were not recent presidents.
Dr. Green, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you all for listening. For the Long Island Advocate, I'm Michael Richardson.